This is Create the Next from ProCFO Partners, where every week we explore strategies and ideas for financial management and growth to help today's businesses put their financial picture in context.
This is Create the Next. Welcome back. I'm Chris Bentliff. Today, my friend Nelson Tepfer, the CEO of the organization, is with us. And Nelson, it's always great to share time with you. I'm always inspired by your thinking. I always learn a lot about what you're thinking. And today we're as you and I are talking, it's the day before Thanksgiving. We're heading into 2025. There's a lot happening in 2025. We're going to be in America moving into a new administration. There's a lot happening with tech and AI. There's a lot happening with fintech. There's a lot happening just kind of even as we are sort of settling down after some things with inflation, et cetera. I'm wondering, first of all, welcome. How are you? What are you seeing? What's your finger on the pulse of? What are the people around you talking about? What are you thinking?
Chris, always great when I get to join you for these conversations. Always one of the highlights of my day, week, or month when we actually manage to get some time together. So it's great to be here. So, it's really interesting this time of year, for us as CFOs and as financial leaders of the many of the organizations that we serve, as well as connected to so many of the resources that we speak to, we find ourselves obviously getting into that planning mode, or really for us, it's usually wrapping up that planning mode because we don't want to leave it too late in the session when we're having these conversations. So we're usually, in middle of budgeting, September, October time, and planning and going through what's going to happen next year. And it's really interesting how common we start seeing how some common themes begin to play out again and again and again across the organizations that we serve, big and small, across industry, which is what I find really, really interesting. So there are some common themes that we started seeing, and I thought this would be a really interesting topic of conversation to what are these common themes businesses are struggling with or focused on heading into next year. So to your point, yes, new administration, but it's one of those kind of things where that's going to be a hurry up and wait. Yes, there's a lot of what is that really going to mean?
Yeah.
No one really knows yet. But aside from that, there are just some general business themes and common focus areas that we've seen, and therefore we figured it would be good to have this chat about them.
Fantastic. There's so much we can't control. There's so much that could impact us and we don't know how, and we don't know what, and to theorize can just make us crazy. So what are some of the things that those things that yep, we'll have to keep an eye on that. We put that over here. But what are the things that you're, hearing about, thinking about, focused on? What are some of these trends?
So for our clients, and this is coming directly from the business owners, that we're currently working with, as well as ones we've spoken to now over the past several years. So this is coming from, a few hundred or so that we've actually spoken to and gotten this information from. Among the most common ones, and this isn't going to shock most business owners or leaders, is cash flow and liquidity.
Right.
They're concerned for how they're going to continue to maintain or how they're going to continue to navigate and manage this, moving into 2025. And some of this is cyclical. Banks are, looking at things a little bit more stricter or less strict, depending on which bank and which cycle they're going through right now. Obviously, we had some banking scares over the past year or two, which certainly had some banks tighten their belts a little bit and how they fund and offer to fund different things. But cash flow, is the lifeblood of every single business. And we find for many business owners and leaders, that remains a focus for them heading into 2025.
What are some of the ways that you're responding to that? And I'm especially kind of wondering, what are some of the KPIs that you have in mind? I always think it's good to address sort of concerns with let's think about data. So what do you target or what do you focus on when you're trying to respond to that concern?
So you just hit on two other areas exactly where business owners head, because these two tend to tie together.
Genius.
One is cash flow liquidity. The second part is obviously the revenue growth, which we as CFOs, the mindset becomes, how are we funding the growth we're trying to build towards? If you're going to double in size, do you have the capital equipment to help you do this? Do you have the right people, or can you afford to bring on the right people that's going to help you do this? Can you afford the inventory you're going to need to sell in order to get that kind of growth? So it is that kind of how these two pieces really play together. One is cash flow liquidity, obviously, to keep your doors open. But frankly, it's also a good problem to have. We're going to double in the next 3 years. What kind of cash flow and liquidity are we going to need to support that kind of growth and how to fund that kind of growth? So the revenue growth is the flip side to that, in the good sense of how we actually focus on that. And that led to the third piece that you mentioned, which is many of our clients are focused on getting better KPIs and reporting, which I always define a little bit differently. When people say KPIs, yeah, what does that mean? I'm looking at these three numbers. What does reporting mean? I'm looking at more reports. Everyone looks at enough reports. What we're truly focused on when we think of KPIs and reporting is making sure the leaders that we serve have the insight they need to make the decisions that they have to on an ongoing basis. So yes, it could be a KPI. Yes, it could be a 3-line Excel sheet. Yes, it could be Power BI. Yes, it could be a several hundred row or several thousand row spreadsheet kind of thing. I think the most crazy one I've ended up building was several million rows, and I ran out of Excel power when I was trying to do that one. But that was, that being said, that's how those three pieces really tie together. So go back to answer your question of how do we support and manage it. It is about the clarity of what is it we're trying to do as an organization. If we are trying to grow, what is our plan for how we're going to achieve this growth? How are we going to fund this growth? And how are we going to measure this growth to know if we're actually on track towards achieving this, or if things are going off track? How do we begin to focus and either pull things back or change our plan if that's what's actually needed to achieve the growth and goals that we are setting?
Let me unpack some of this a little bit. And you just touched on something that I want to connect to, which is what is the plan? Are you finding, or how valuable is it to revisit the revenue model when you're focusing on what's the revenue sort of situation as we head into cash flow? We've talked before about how a lot of organizations sort of set it and forget it 20 years ago. Like, this is our revenue model, and maybe aren't taking into account competitive dynamics, market dynamics, changing technologies, supply chain things. So is that a place where, do you start from there, or where do you start with focusing on the revenue as you're trying to inform profit and things? Like, I guess, how robust is that examination of revenue?
So very often it varies based on the entry point of when we're brought in, and perhaps the biggest pain point. Like, if companies are truly concerned about making payroll within a very specific period of time, they're not really going to be thinking about revenue model. Mm-hmm. So it becomes great. What kind of funding is needed to make sure we can get through this period so we can step back and begin to think about bigger picture? But in general, when we start with almost every organization, it is truly understanding what they do as a business. Who do they do this for? What is a problem they're really solving? And making sure that their financials and the reporting that gets built is actually in line with what they're actually doing as an organization. Because to your point, Chris, I've seen this happen often enough. An organization sets these things in place, and then, yeah, to your point, it's like, great, then we just keep doing things. Then you start looking at their financials, like, wait a second, you're not doing any of these things anymore. Now you're doing these 16 other things. How are we reporting on all this other things to know if this is working or not? And they're like, oh, well, we have this spreadsheet that we look at, or we saw this other kind of thing that we know this is going on over here in this report that we build on a monthly basis, as opposed to building an actual functional reporting system that says, this is working, this is not, this is what our margins is across these different areas, and this is where we should continue to grow, this is where we should continue to invest, or this is what we should stop doing because this isn't working.
I love the stop doing. That's on my mind with the KPIs. Everybody probably has, these are the 5 things that you should always have in front of you, or whatever. But tell me if I'm wrong. I feel like a lot of business leaders are just used to seeing the same thing. So therefore, that's the thing they see. And so it can be myopic. They're just focusing on these things, and maybe they're missing a bigger picture.
I'll give you a really fun example of it.
Yes.
This came from the story of one of our team members. He's sitting with a business owner. He started working with this organization, and for the first 3 months, he's sitting in their monthly management meeting. And in this monthly management meeting, this aside from all the other conversations and meetings he's a part of, but in this monthly management meeting, they go through their P&L on a monthly basis. And it's a 4-page P&L. And essentially, the review process in these 3 months that he was sitting there was something along the lines of, the review was, okay, good, got it, perfect, okay, good. Next page, good, okay, wonderful. And after 3 months of this, the CFO turns to the leadership team and says, I've now watched this happen 3 times, and we haven't seen anything about this. We haven't done anything about this. So instead of reviewing this way on a next month, how about I bring you the 5 numbers you actually need to know and can take action on to understand what are the things you need to be doing differently, change, or keep doing that's actually working for the organization. I mean, and that's what he shifted the conversation to. So that's what we mean by KPI on reporting. It's like, yes, you can look at all the reports you want. It doesn't help. You need to know what you should be looking at to say if things are working or not working, whether you should continue, or to the point that you referenced before, stop doing the things that are not working. It gets hidden very often in larger reporting, the pieces that are really not working. We've killed product lines that we thought were profitable because it was mixed in the overhead of some of the other pieces. Like, no, if you really break out what's actually costing you, you shouldn't keep doing this. You should be focused on here because this is where all the actual profit or a higher profit margin is really focused. This is where you should go after it.
Part of what I'm hearing you say is, if that's typical of your business meetings, if you're just going through a thing and you're just sort of nodding your heads, that may be a symptom that you need to have a closer look at this, that you don't even realize that you need to have a closer look at this. And I feel like we get into a place with reports where we get comfortable looking at the past or present tense, and we don't necessarily have a sense of, what does this mean? As you said, these are the 5 things that mean something, so that next month we're having this other conversation. So is that part of, as you're focusing on these, cash flow as a future tense, revenue is a present and future tense. Reporting is too often present and past tense. Is it a challenge as you're helping business leaders moving into 2025 to sort of reconcile that, to sort of figure out your reporting has to do something different so that these other two things can do something different?
So yes, is the short answer. Which
I don't love short answers. You know, I'm not a short answer guy.
I know, but to truly understand, that goes back to what we said before. If we understand the objectives and what we're trying to set heading into 2025, then we can understand what is it we need to be looking at from a reporting perspective that says if this is working or not. Then we can understand the cash flow needs we're going to have to say, great, can we fund this internally, or do we need to bring on external funding? Do we need to bring on debt, another line of credit, a different factoring solution, a different, any of the other different solutions that exist out there to support cash flow and funding the growth that we're actually saying? Or the answer is like, no, we're all good. We're going to fund it entirely internally. That's great. But then we get into some of the conversations with our clients. What are you doing with the excess cash? How are you putting that to use in an organization? We spoke to one recently where they were sitting on quite a large sum of money because of the way their business operates. And they hadn't actually utilized, for instance, some higher banking, some actually higher returns that probably cost them close to $1 million just in the last 2 years because of the way they were managing their cash. And they didn't realize that just because they were managing or mismanaging just their cash reserves that they had on hand, it literally cost them nearly $1 million.
That, I don't know. I don't know if you have other trends that are kind of top of mind and I want to dig into them, but what you just said for me feels like a hot point, which is, do you have the right minds in the room heading into 2025 to help you identify things, strategic minds to help focus these things and find these opportunities, whether they're opportunities that you're missing or opportunities that you could be taking advantage of, or things, again, that you need to stop doing? Is that a focal point? People feeling like, I'm not sure if I have the support around me, or do you feel like it should be a focal point?
Oh, it definitely should be. Definitely should be a focal point. I think I've shared with you the best iteration I had, the best verbiage I found of the things that we solve or that really business leaders are really looking for when you talk about right people around them is when a business owner tells me, and I think I've shared this with you before, Chris, when a business owner tells me, Nelson, this company is too big for me to run on gut instinct alone. It is that feeling that they should begin looking for experts or some kind of guidance around them. If that's how they feel they're running the organization. Now, this person was not really running it that way. This is a very successful company, a few hundred people on the employee side. He had the books in order, up to date. It wasn't like things were bad there. But when he felt he was running it on gut instinct, there's a really key distinction between what was happening operationally from his accounting function to what was informing him as the CEO on the strategic objectives that he was working towards. And that's why he felt he was running it on gut instinct.
I hate to broad stroke, and of course, everybody's going to be different, but do you find that there are, I don't know, consistencies or sort of best practices for here are the things the CEO should know, or these are the 5 things or the 3 things, or this is the thing that you should please ask yourself if you're doing, so you should stop doing it? It depends on the size of the organization, how long you've been in business, what kind of leader you are, but is there a common thread?
Really break it down and simplify. I'm a big fan of simplify to achieve for a lot of these kind of areas. When we identify what their goals are for next year, they should in their head have some basic metrics on whether and what they can measure if it is working or not. For instance, if they said they're going to grow 20% next year, great. Month over month, as you head into next year, what should the growth look like to see if you're going to hit that kind of growth? What does that look like for you? Because that kind of insight along the way lets you address things and course correct along, instead of waiting till September, October, November. And then it's like, oh, well, we missed our goal this year. Now what are we going to do, kind of thing? And which is what happens very often with many companies. So sitting now in this time of year, we talk about plan, we talk about budget, because budget is not about, oh, well, we did our budget for next year. Now we know what we're spending. Budget is about where are we investing. That's going to help us achieve the goals that we're setting. And the process of looking at this on a monthly basis, the budget to actual, it's like, okay, where are we up to? Are we spending more than we thought we would? Doesn't mean you have to stop doing things. There might be reasons why you're spending more than you thought you would, which is fine as long as things change and adjusted. Or are we meeting our interim and set revenue goals or targets that are going to help us achieve what we set? If we're going to increase margin, for instance, but that's one of the best CEO's bigger objectives, like, oh, our margins are too low, we need to increase them next year. Great. How will you know if that's working or not? What's your process that you plan on setting up that tells you along the way, is the increase working? What are the initiatives you're putting in place in the operations? What pricing adjustments are you making heading into next year that's going to help you increase those margins? It's understanding the drivers for the goals that they're setting so they can measure the impact of those drivers that they're going to put in place.
I feel like that was golden advice that should be like crystallized and put on everybody's shelf, because so many leaders, in my experience, in organizations that I've worked in and worked with, this is the time when we have a great big focused sort of structured strategy. We're heading into the year meeting, and I'll see you again next fall. Like we don't build these monthly, weekly, I don't know, quarterly touch points to say, all right, this is what we said, therefore we should be, what's keeping us from, what do we need to do differently? We just sort of hope it's going to work out, or we put some number up, we throw some, we're going to grow by 12%. Maybe, we don't know. We don't think about how. We just have these sort of like, I don't know, aspirational goals. First of all, am I just in the wrong organizations all the time, or do you see that consistently?
We do, is the short answer. We definitely see that pretty consistently. And one of the things we talk about is, hope is not a strategy.
Right.
That is not exactly the way this works. The other one is, some of the quotes we use in our newsletters is really a funny one, right? The Nolan Bushnell quotes comes to mind this time of year, right? Everyone who's ever taken a shower has had an idea. It's the person who gets out of the shower, drives off, and does something about it that makes a difference. We're sitting here this time of year. It's like we all have ideas for next year. What are we actually going to do that's going to make us achieve? That's going to help us achieve these goals.
Oh, dude, and that is so good, because that idea, that ideation, that let's all get in the room, and that feels like action. I feel like for me, that's always something that I say in these situations, which is be really careful of what feels like you're doing something, what feels like setting up productivity, when really you didn't execute on anything. And I feel like that needs to be the next step. And that comes back to, are you surrounding yourself with the right people, including those who might, as your pro CFO stood up and challenged, look, everybody, I've been here for 3 months and we're doing this. Next time, let's do something different. You have to have somebody who will nudge the conversation, maybe even uncomfortably if necessary, but in a more productive way.
Absolutely true. There's always another two quotes that really highlights that, right? There's the Albert Einstein version. The solution cannot come from the same level of consciousness that caused the problem. Although that's a really fascinating quote in and of itself, which we can talk about in greater detail at some point, because that quote actually came from a letter that he wrote to investors who were trying to raise money. But that's a separate conversation. In 1947, he was trying to raise money for the atomic oversight. But
okay, we're coming back to that one someday, because that sounds awesome.
But the more colloquial version, obviously, is if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you always got, kind of thing. Yes. But it's that same mentality that you just referenced. If you're doing the same things this year as you ran into last year, are you really expecting a different result from next year than what you got this year? That's really what it comes down to heading into next year in 2025.
Is there, as ProCFO Partners is in its own sort of state of growth and trajectory, is there a benefit or an advantage for a fractional mind, a fractional expert in these situations? I'm not trying to turn us into an angle of like, well, let's explore ProCFO Partners angle on it, but where is the benefit of an outside mind or an outside perspective or an outside strategic sort of body complement to that can help shape some of that?
So fractional is a medium of delivery, not a measure of not a measure of impact it has on an organization.
Fantastic. I love that.
When we say, every organization needs a CFO's perspective. What happens with most organizations, someone else in the company is providing that kind of function along the way. And so when that is no longer good enough is when you start looking for a different layer or level of function. And this is true at the CFO, COO, CMO, CRO. So you can go down the entire list of the C-suite. Forget about the C title. You need leaders along the way that are going to support you in achieving your goals and vision and success you're looking for. Fractional is just a medium of delivery, but every organization needs those experts, needs that perspective. And very often, really, really small companies, is the CEO, owner, founder who's providing all of those perspectives. Yes. But as it grows and it's like, okay, these are the things I should know and should be doing more of. I need a different layer of expert to support what I am trying to do. And that's really what they should be thinking about, looking for that level of expertise.
There's a couple, there are client stories on the website. Go to ProCFOPartners.com, and there are stories which are kind of really involved case studies. And I've been wanting to just kind of ask you about these in a kind of a, I don't know, there was some pride in it as I was exploring some of these. We've had some CEOs share, I don't think I'd be in business if it weren't for ProCFO Partners. Another said, well, another was real candid that like, look, my marriage wasn't so great and it's a lot healthier now because that person was doing all the things you just said. And of course, you expand that into the people of your life and they worry with you. And this person has some resolution that's way outside the 9 to 5. How does that, I mean, first of all, well done, everybody. But that's kind of what it's all about, isn't it? Like if you strip away kind of the nuts and bolts and the stuff around it, we want you to be a better person, a healthier person, your relationships to be, that's why we go to work even, so that we can surround ourselves with the things that make those things better. That's, I guess, a big version of looking at all of this as you head into 2025.
It is the impact we have on the organizations we serve. It is one of our core values and why we do what we do. We're looking to have an impact, a lasting impact on these organizations. It is not about selling access to time or just throwing a report on their desk. It is helping them build, manage, and lead their finance and accounting functions so it supports their growth and goals. It is arming them with the insight they need to make the decisions that they have to. It is those components which actually has that impact that you just described. Because if we can actually take this portion away from the business owner who's trying to do this or upgrade this from a function that's struggling to do this, the impact that it has, forget about on their personal lives, which as you just highlighted is pretty profound, but the impact that it has on an organization is exponential. It accelerates their growth. It helps them achieve the goals that they're working towards.
And I feel like that's an inspirational way to sort of head into 2025, unburden yourself of some of those things. And what could it be a year from now when we're talking about going into 2026, if there were, if these changes could be made, if this new thing could be, if you could stop doing, I think that's almost the place to get to, that's the place where all these big goals and visions and things should get you to the place where this is a new conversation a year from now.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true.
Nelson Tepfer is the CEO at ProCFO Partners, and I'm so happy to talk to you. I'm so happy to talk to you right now, this time of year, about this stuff. It's energizing me, as it always does, and I'm so grateful for your expertise and these little nuggets you throw out that are like, geez Louise, let me write that down. It's such good stuff, Nelson, and I'm so grateful for you and for your time and attention and your expertise and sharing it with us today. Thank you. It's good to be with you.
Thank you, Chris. Always enjoy our conversations.
Thanks for watching, and a special thanks to our subscribers. Consider becoming one today. Visit ProCFOPartners.com for more strategies and ideas for financial management and growth to help you put your business's financial picture in context.